What happens when a fairy tale wedding becomes a nightmare before the candles are even snuffed out? She was Lady Annelise Beaumont, the envy of the London season, chosen by the most powerful and enigmatic man in the aristocracy, the Duke of Blackwood. Before the eyes of the entire court, he slipped a ring on her finger, binding their lives and their great houses together forever. But that very night, in the gilded silence of their palatial bedchamber, he turned to her, not with a lover's embrace, but with a devastating confession. His 3 cold sentences would shatter her world and begin a war fought not on a battlefield, but within the walls of their own loveless home. The wedding of Duke Alistair Beaumont of Blackwood to Lady Annelise Croft was the event that London society would speak of for a decade. St. George's Chapel was a constellation of jewels and silk, every pew occupied by the highest echelons of the English aristocracy. Sunlight filtered through the magnificent stained glass windows, painted the stone floors in hues of sapphire and ruby, illuminating the dust motes, dancing in the air like tiny captured stars. To the onlookers, it was the perfect union of power and beauty. The Duke, with his vast fortune, ancient title and brooding, handsome features, was the ultimate prize. And Lady Annelise, celebrated for her grace, sharp intellect, and serene beauty, was his perfect match. Annelise felt as though she were floating through a dream. The weight of her ivory silk gown, embroidered with thousands of seed pearls, was a comforting reality in the whirlwind of the day. Her father, Earl Croft, had squeezed her hand one last time before placing it into the Duke's. "He is a good man, Annelise," he had whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He will protect you." Alistair's hand was cool and firm around hers. He had been a whirlwind suitor, attentive, proper, and impeccably charming in a reserved, almost formal way. He hadn't spoken of love, but in their world, love was a luxury, a happy accident that sometimes followed duty. He spoke of partnership, of mutual respect, of the future of the Blackwood line. Annelise, practical and raised to understand her role, accepted this. She had seen the way he looked at her, a flicker of something she interpreted as admiration in his deep grey eyes. It was enough. Hope, she believed, was a fertile seed that could blossom into love with time and care. As she stood beside him at the altar, she dared to dream. She imagined their life at Blackwood Manor, his ancestral home. She pictured evenings by the fire, quiet conversations, the gradual thawing of his formal demeanour into genuine affection. She dreamt of children, their laughter echoing through the ancient halls, and of one day seeing true warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, his wife, his Duchess. The reception at the Duke's London residence was even more opulent. Champagne flowed from fountains, and an orchestra played from a gilded balcony, the music a joyful counterpoint to the hum of 1,000 conversations. Annelise was a vision of bridal perfection, smiling until her cheeks ached, accepting congratulations from lords and ladies whose names she could barely recall. Alistair remained by her side, a powerful, possessive presence. His hand never left the small of her back, a public gesture of ownership that sent a thrill of both excitement and trepidation through her. Finally, the endless day drew to a close. The guests departed, their carriages clattering over the cobblestones, leaving a profound silence in their wake. Annelise was escorted to the Duchess's chambers by her new lady's maid, a quiet, efficient woman named Eleanor. The suite of rooms was breathtaking, larger than the entire ground floor of her father's city home. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting a warm, flickering glow over the rosewood furniture and sumptuous fabrics. "His Grace will join you shortly, Your Grace," Eleanor said with a slight curtsy, after helping Annelise out of the heavy wedding gown and into a delicate nightgown of spun silk and lace. Left alone, Annelise's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The beginning of her real life. Her real marriage. She stood by the window, looking out over the moonlit gardens, her mind a flurry of nervous anticipation. She heard the door open and close softly behind her. She turned, a shy smile gracing her lips. Alistair stood there, having shed his formal wedding attire for a simple dressing gown of dark velvet. He looked impossibly handsome, yet his face was a mask of unreadable coldness. The reserved charm of the past few weeks had vanished, replaced by an unnerving stillness. He walked not towards her, but towards the fireplace, resting one arm on the mantelpiece and staring into the flames. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the crackle of burning logs. Annelise's smile faltered. "Alistair?" she ventured, her voice barely a whisper. He turned his head slowly, his grey eyes meeting hers. They were not filled with admiration or passion, but with something that looked chillingly like regret. "Annelise," he began, his voice low and devoid of any warmth. "There are things that must be established between us, for this union to proceed as it must. I have married you to fulfill my duty to my name and my title. You will be the mother of my heir. In public, you will have my respect. In private, you will have my patronage and the full protection of my name." He paused, and Annelise felt a knot of ice form in her stomach. This was not the speech of a nervous groom. This was a proclamation. "You will want for nothing," he continued, his gaze as hard as granite. "This house, its staff, its fortunes, they are now yours to command as the Duchess. But I must be unequivocally clear on one matter." He pushed himself from the mantel and took a step towards her. His proximity was overwhelming, but it offered no comfort, only intimidation. "My heart," he said, the words precise and cruel, each one a perfectly aimed dagger, "is not mine to give. It has belonged to another for a very long time, and it always will." He saw the colour drain from her face, the hope in her eyes extinguish like a snuffed candle, but he did not soften. "This is a marriage of duty, Annelise. Nothing more. Do not expect affection from me. It is a currency I do not possess." And with that, he turned, walked to a connecting door she hadn't noticed, and entered his own chambers, closing the door firmly behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the cavernous room, a sound of finality. Annelise stood frozen, the silk of her nightgown feeling like ice against her skin. The warmth from the fire couldn't reach her. She was the Duchess of Blackwood. She was the mistress of a grand fortune and a grander title. She was married to the most desirable man in England, and she was utterly, devastatingly alone in her gilded cage. The dream had shattered, and the reality was a cold, empty silence. The journey to Blackwood Manor, the Duke's sprawling country estate, took place 2 days later in a state of muted agony. The carriage, sprung with the latest technology for comfort and emblazoned with the ducal crest, felt like a hearse carrying her hopes to their final resting place. Alistair sat opposite her, a book open on his lap, though she never once saw him turn a page. He did not speak, and Annelise, wrapped in a thick cloak of shock and humiliation, could not find the words to break the oppressive silence. Blackwood Manor rose from the rolling hills of the countryside like a stone titan. It was a masterpiece of architecture, a formidable blend of Tudor foundations and Georgian elegance, surrounded by hundreds of acres of ancient woodland and manicured gardens. It was beautiful, powerful, and intimidating. Much like its master, as Annelise stepped out of the carriage, the entire household staff was lined up on the grand stone steps to greet their new Duchess. The butler, a stern, white-haired man named Finch, bowed stiffly. "Welcome to Blackwood, Your Grace." The words were respectful, but the eyes of the staff that swept over her were filled with a cool, measuring curiosity. She felt like an exhibit, a new piece of furniture acquired for the estate. Alistair offered a few curt words to his steward before turning to her. "Finch will show you to your rooms. I have matters of the estate to attend to," he said, his tone as distant as if he were addressing a stranger. He strode away towards the stables without a backward glance. Annelise's chambers were, like the London house, opulent and immaculate. But as she explored the vast rooms, a suffocating sense of unease began to creep over her. This was not a home. It was a museum, and it was a museum dedicated to someone else. In the sitting room adjoining her bedroom, a magnificent portrait hung above the fireplace. It was of a woman with fiery auburn hair, emerald green eyes, and a smile that was both mischievous and deeply sad. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Annelise felt an immediate, visceral pang of inadequacy. "Who is that?" she asked Eleanor, her voice strained. Eleanor, who was unpacking Annelise's gowns, hesitated for a moment. "That is Lady Seraphina, Your Grace." The name was spoken softly, almost reverently. The name. The other. The one who owned the heart her husband refused to give. In the days that followed, Annelise discovered that Lady Seraphina was not just in a portrait. She was everywhere. Her presence was woven into the very fabric of Blackwood Manor. The books in the library had her name, Seraphina Dawberry, inscribed on the inside covers in elegant, looping script. The music room held sheets of music for the pianoforte, compositions Annelise knew to be fiendishly difficult, with notes in the margins in the same feminine hand. The gardeners spoke of the Seraphina roses, a unique hybrid she had cultivated in the East Garden. She was a ghost who haunted every corridor. The older members of the staff, who had known Alistair his entire life, would sometimes fall silent when Annelise entered a room, their conversations dying with a guilty awkwardness. She learned through snippets of overheard gossip that Lady Seraphina was the daughter of a neighbouring viscount, Alistair's childhood friend, and, it was universally understood, his one true love. They were meant to be married, the story went, but fate and her family's sudden financial ruin had intervened. She had been forced to marry a wealthy, older Scottish lord to save her family, leaving Alistair devastated. He had never recovered. This was the accepted truth of Blackwood Manor. Living as Alistair's wife was a masterclass in emotional endurance. They ate their meals together in the cavernous dining hall, a long expanse of polished mahogany separating them. The conversation was stilted, limited to pleasantries about the weather or mundane reports on the estate. He was never overtly cruel, but his politeness was a weapon, a wall of impenetrable civility that kept her firmly at a distance. He performed his public duties as her husband flawlessly, his hand on her arm at church, a polite smile on his face when they received local dignitaries. But the moment they were alone, the mask would drop, and he would retreat into his cold, silent world. Nights were the worst. He never returned to her bedchamber after their wedding night. She would lie awake, staring at the canopy of her massive bed, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house, acutely aware of him in his own rooms, just a wall away. She was a duchess, yet she felt like a fraud. She was a wife, yet she was a virgin, untouched and unwanted. One rainy afternoon, seeking refuge from the oppressive atmosphere of the main house, Annelise found a small, forgotten drawing room at the end of a dusty wing. It was clear no one had used it in years. In a locked rosewood box on a writing desk, she found a collection of poems. They were handwritten by Alistair. They were passionate, filled with yearning and exquisite pain, and every single one was dedicated to Seraphina. Reading them was like pressing a shard of glass into an open wound. This was the man she was married to, not the cold, dutiful Duke, but a man of deep, powerful feeling. He was capable of a love so profound it bled onto the page in ink. But that love was not, and would never be, for her. That evening, as she sat opposite him at dinner, she watched him over the rim of her wine-glass. She saw the subtle tension in his jaw, the deep, abiding sadness in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. She wasn't just fighting for a place in her marriage. She was fighting a ghost, a perfect, romanticized memory that her living, breathing self could never compete with. The hope she had carried on her wedding day had withered and died. In its place, something else was beginning to take root, a cold, hard knot of resilience. She was the Duchess of Blackwood, and she would not be defeated by a ghost. After a month in the suffocating solitude of the countryside, the return to London for the start of the social season was a jarring yet welcome change. Annelise knew she would now be under the intense scrutiny of the ton, all of whom were desperate for a glimpse into the marriage of their most formidable duke. She had a role to play, the adored, radiant new Duchess. It was a performance, and she was determined to play it flawlessly. Their first major appearance was at a ball hosted by the Countess of Danbury. As she descended the grand staircase on Alistair's arm, a hush fell over the crowd. She wore a gown of deep emerald velvet that complemented the famous Blackwood diamonds encircling her throat. She held her head high, a serene and confident smile fixed on her face. To the outside world, they were the picture of marital bliss. Alistair was attentive, his hand a constant, proprietary presence on her back, his voice a low murmur in her ear as he pointed out various guests. It was a masterful illusion. During a break in the dancing, a gentleman approached them. He had a warm, open face and kind, intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than most. "Your Grace," he said with a charming smile, bowing to Annelise first. "I am Lord Grayson, a friend of your husband's from Eton. It is a profound honor to finally meet the woman who has accomplished the impossible and captured the Duke of Blackwood." Annelise felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the genuine warmth in his tone. "Lord Grayson, the pleasure is all mine." Alistair's demeanor was stiff. "Grayson, I wasn't aware you were back in London." "Just returned from the continent," Grayson replied easily, his eyes twinkling. "I must say, Duchess, marriage suits him. I haven't seen this much of a smile from Alistair since he managed to put a frog in our tutor's tea." Annelise laughed, a real, unforced sound. It felt foreign and wonderful. Alistair merely gave a tight-lipped nod. For the rest of the evening, Lord Grayson sought her out twice more, once for a dance and once to bring her a glass of lemonade. His conversation was light and engaging, and for the first time in weeks, Annelise felt like a person, not just a title. Her performance, however, did not go unnoticed by the one person whose opinion mattered most within the family, the Dowager Duchess, Alistair's mother. Lady Beatrice Beaumont was a woman carved from ice, with piercing eyes that missed nothing. She summoned Annelise for tea the following afternoon. "You are managing the public aspect of your duties admirably," the Dowager began, without any preamble. "The ton is convinced of the success of the match." "I aim to please your Grace," Annelise replied, her posture perfect, her hand steady as she lifted her teacup. "See that you continue to do so," the Dowager said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Alistair has always been a sensitive man. He requires a wife who is dignified, discreet, and understands the boundaries of her position. Do not mistake the kindness of men like Lord Grayson for anything more than politeness. Your focus must be singular, the continuation of the Blackwood line and the protection of its name." It was a clear warning. Annelise left the Dowager's residence feeling chilled, but also strangely emboldened. The old woman's words confirmed what she already suspected. She was a vessel, a means to an end. But the Dowager had also revealed a weakness, an anxiety over the family name. That evening, seeking a book in the London House Library, a room Alistair rarely used, she ran her fingers along the spines of old, leather-bound tomes. One book, A History of British Peerages, was slightly askew. Acting on instinct, she pulled it from the shelf. Tucked behind it, fallen into the gap, was a slim leather portfolio. It was not old. The leather was new and supple. Her heart pounding, she opened it. Inside were not love letters or poems, but financial ledgers, columns of figures, notes on investments, and correspondence from solicitors. Her father, a shrewd man, had insisted she be educated not just in watercolors and French, but in mathematics and estate management. She understood what she was looking at far better than most women of her station. And what she saw made her gasp. The Blackwood fortune, long thought to be as vast and unshakable as the monarchy itself, was in dire straits. Bad investments made by the previous Duke, Alistair's late father, coupled with 2 seasons of failed crops on their primary agricultural lands, had bled the estate dry. They were leveraged to a terrifying degree. The veneer of untouchable wealth was just that, a veneer. But the most shocking discovery was a letter at the bottom of the pile. It was from a solicitor to Alistair, dated just a week before he had proposed to her. "My Lord Duke," it read, "following the final accounting of your father's debts, the situation is more precarious than we feared. The banks will call in their loans within the year. Without a significant and immediate infusion of capital, I do not see how Blackwood can avoid ruin. Your only viable option is to marry, and to marry exceptionally well." Annelise sank into a nearby chair, the letter trembling in her hand. Her dowry, her substantial, famously large dowry. It wasn't just for show or to secure a good match. It had been a lifeline. Alistair hadn't married her simply for duty to his title. He had married her for her money. He had married her to save his family from utter ruin. The confession on their wedding night replayed in her mind. But now it sounded different. The cruelty, the coldness. Was it just about a lost love? Or was it also the guilt and resentment of a proud man forced to sell himself to the highest bidder? The ghost of Lady Seraphina was a convenient excuse, a romantic tragedy to hide a much more humiliating truth. The great Duke of Blackwood was bankrupt. The revelation of the Blackwoods' financial crisis shifted the ground beneath Annelise's feet. Her humiliation and heartbreak began to curdle into a cold, clarifying anger. She had been used, her fortune the silent, unacknowledged party in their marriage contract. Alistair's grand tragedy of a lost love now seemed like a carefully constructed stage play, designed to keep her at an emotional distance so she would never get close enough to see the truth. Annelise decided she would no longer be a passive audience to his drama. She began her own quiet, methodical investigation. She started by inviting the estate steward, Mr. Abernathy, to London under the guise of reviewing household accounts. Abernathy was a man loyal to the Blackwood name, but he was also a practical man of figures. "Your Grace," he said, surprised by the depth of her questions. The late Duke was a man of grand visions. Not all of them proved profitable. "I see," Annelise said, her pen scratching notes on a ledger she had prepared. "And His Grace, the current Duke, has he taken steps to rectify this?" "His Grace works tirelessly, Abernathy said, though a flicker of frustration crossed his face. But he is attempting to rebuild a mountain with a shovel, if you'll forgive the plain speaking. She had gained an unwitting ally. Abernathy, seeing her genuine interest and sharp mind, began to speak more freely of the financial burdens the Duke bore alone. Her next line of inquiry was the ghost herself, Lady Seraphina. If Alistair's obsession was the shield for his financial secrets, Annelise wanted to understand the woman behind the myth. She started with gossip, the lifeblood of the ton. During a morning visit with Lady Danbury, a woman who knew everything about everyone, Annelise casually brought up the name. Seraphina Dawberry? Oh, that was a tragedy, the Countess said, fanning herself. Such a beauty. They were inseparable from childhood, she and Blackwood. Everyone assumed they would marry, but her father invested everything in a shipping venture that went belly up, utterly ruined. She had to marry that old walrus, the Baron of Inverness, to keep her family out of debtor's prison. Broke poor Blackwood's heart. "Where is she now?" Annelise asked, trying to keep her tone light. "Oh, Inverness keeps her tucked away in the Highlands. Hates London. Can't say I blame him," the Countess sniffed. "Probably for the best. A clean break, a clean break." But Alistair hadn't made a clean break. He was nursing a wound that Seraphina herself had seemingly moved on from. This discrepancy bothered Annelise. Why cling so fiercely to a woman who was married and living hundreds of miles away? Through Lord Grayson, whose friendship she carefully cultivated, she found her next piece of the puzzle. Grayson, having no knowledge of the inner turmoil of her marriage, spoke freely of his friend. "I worry about Alistair," he admitted one afternoon as they strolled through Hyde Park. "He was never the same after Seraphina left. But it's more than that. He carries the weight of his father's legacy like a shroud. The old Duke was a charmer, but a terrible gambler with investments." "Did Lady Seraphina know about the financial troubles?" Annelise asked, feigning idle curiosity. Grayson shook his head. "I doubt it. Alistair is far too proud. He would have wanted to be her saviour, not another man needing to be saved. In fact," he paused, thinking, "I received a letter from a mutual friend in Edinburgh just last month. He mentioned seeing the Baron and his wife at a recital. Said Lady Seraphina looked quite content. She's expecting their first child." Annelise's steps faltered. Expecting a child. The myth of the pining, heartbroken lover shattered. Seraphina wasn't waiting for Alistair. She hadn't spent the last few years consumed by their tragic separation. She had built a new life. She was a wife, and soon she would be a mother. Alistair's obsessive devotion was not just a shield for his financial problems, it was a complete fabrication. He was clinging to the memory of a girl who no longer existed, romanticizing a past that the other party had clearly moved on from. His pain was real, perhaps, but it was a self-inflicted wound he refused to let heal. He wasn't just hiding his bankruptcy from her. He was hiding from reality. He had locked himself in a prison of his own making, and the ghost of Seraphina was his warden. That evening, Annelise went back to the small drawing room where she had found his poems. She read them again, but this time they didn't seem romantic. They seemed pathetic. The words of a man so terrified of present failure that he had retreated entirely into a glorified past. She closed the book with a snap. She was done feeling sorry for herself, and she was done being intimidated by him. She was married to a man, not a tragic hero, a man drowning in pride, debt, and delusion. And as the Duchess of Blackwood, his ruin would be her ruin. She would not allow that to happen. She had the key to his family's survival, her fortune, and the knowledge of his deepest secrets. She finally had leverage. Armed with the truth about the estate's finances and Lady Seraphina's new life, Annelise knew her next move could not be an emotional confrontation with Alistair. His pride was a fortress. A direct assault would only make him raise the drawbridge. Her target had to be the one person whose pragmatism might outweigh their sentiment. The Dowager Duchess. She requested a meeting, arriving at the Dowager's residence not as a supplicant daughter-in-law, but as an equal. She wore a simple but severe day dress of dark blue, her hair coiled neatly, her demeanor calm and businesslike. "You requested to see me, Annelise," the Dowager said, her tone implying it was an inconvenience. "I trust this is important." "It is a matter of the utmost importance, Your Grace," Annelise began, taking the seat opposite the older woman. "It concerns the future of the Blackwood name." The Dowager's eyes sharpened. Annelise had her full attention. "I have been reviewing the estate accounts," Annelise stated calmly, not a hint of accusation in her voice. She watched as a flicker of alarm crossed the Dowager's carefully composed face. "It seems the late Duke's enthusiasm for speculative ventures has left the family in a rather delicate position." The silence in the room was absolute. The Dowager Duchess did not gasp or deny it. She simply stared, her expression turning from imperious to wary. "My dowry," Annelise continued, pressing her advantage, "was substantial. I believe it was intended to serve as more than just decoration for the marriage contract. It was intended to be a solution I am now prepared to offer." "What are you proposing?" the Dowager asked, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "I propose an alliance," Annelise said, leaning forward slightly. "I will place my entire fortune at the family's disposal to clear the debts and modernize the agricultural holdings. We will not just save Blackwood, we will make it more profitable than it has been in a century. My father taught me well. I know how to make money grow." The Dowager's eyebrows rose. This was not the timid girl she had dismissed weeks ago. "And in return?" she asked, the unspoken question hanging in the air. "In return," Annelise's voice was like steel wrapped in velvet, "I will have my rightful place, not as a figurehead, but as a true partner in this family. I will have full autonomy over the management of the household and a seat at the table with the solicitors and stewards. I will be the Duchess, in fact, not just in name. And you will help me." "Help you?" "Your son is living in a fantasy," Annelise stated bluntly. "He is hiding from his responsibilities behind the ghost of a woman who is, by all accounts, happily married and expecting a child. This obsession is a poison that is weakening him, and, by extension, this house. He will not listen to me, but he might listen to you. You will help him see reason. You will help him let go of the past, so we can secure the future." The Dowager Duchess stared at Annelise for a long, silent moment. She saw not an impertinent upstart, but a formidable woman offering the only path out of a disaster. She saw a reflection of her own youthful pragmatism. In that moment, respect, cold and clear, was born. "The late Duke," Lady Beatrice began, her voice strained with a lifetime of concealed emotion, "was a wonderful man, but a fool. He believed every promise of a fast fortune. I tried to warn him. When he died, and Alistair discovered the true state of our affairs, the shame nearly broke him. He felt he had failed his entire lineage." She looked away, towards a portrait of her late husband. Seraphina was his excuse. It was easier to mourn a lost love than to face the humiliation of near poverty. Clinging to that memory allowed him to keep the world, including a new wife, at arm's length. He feared failing someone he cared for. It was easier not to care at all. It was a confession, a validation of everything Annelise had pieced together. "So we have an agreement?" Annelise asked softly. The Dowager Duchess turned back, her eyes meeting Annelise's. A silent understanding passed between the two women, the matriarch who had long propped up the family's facade, and the newcomer who had the means to make it real again. "We have an agreement," the Dowager confirmed with a crisp nod. "You will save my family's fortune, Duchess, and I will help you manage my son." Annelise left the meeting feeling a surge of power she had never known. She was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was an architect of her own destiny. She had faced the formidable Dowager and forged not just a truce, but a partnership. Now, there was only one person left to confront: her husband. Annelise chose her moment carefully. It was 2 nights later, in the library of their London home. Alistair was at his desk, a mountain of papers before him, a familiar look of strained weariness on his face. He was trying to hold back the tide with his bare hands. She entered without knocking, closing the heavy oak doors behind her with a definitive click. He looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance at the intrusion. "Annelise, I am busy," he said, his tone dismissive. "I know," she replied, walking calmly towards the desk. She did not sit, but stood opposite him, forcing him to look up at her. "You are busy trying to keep your dukedom from collapsing into ruin." The pen in Alistair's hand stilled, every trace of colour drained from his face, replaced by a rigid, defensive fury. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" she countered, her voice steady and clear. "I know that your father's investments were ruinous. I know that the banks are threatening to call in their loans. And I know that you married me for my dowry, because your solicitor advised you it was your only viable option." She let the words hang in the air, watching as his carefully constructed composure shattered. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not cold indifference, but raw, cornered panic. "How?" he stammered. "That doesn't matter," she cut him off. "What matters is that we are in this together, whether you like it or not. Your ruin is my ruin, and I will not be ruined." He rose from his chair, his height meant to intimidate her. But Annelise did not flinch. "This is my burden to bear," he snarled, his voice low. "It is not your concern." "Not my concern?" she asked, a spark of incredulous fire in her eyes. "You made it my concern when you placed that ring on my finger. You stood before God and man and made me your wife, your Duchess. Did you think I was a doll to be dressed up and paraded in public while you secretly dealt with the rot in our foundations?" She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "And you will stop using Lady Seraphina as an excuse for your behavior." At the mention of the name, he recoiled as if struck. "Leave her out of this." "I will not," Annelise shot back, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "I refuse to live in the shadow of a ghost, especially one who has moved on. She's married, Alistair. She's happy. She's expecting a child. Her life has continued. Why hasn't yours?" The blow landed exactly as she intended. It wasn't an attack on his love, but on his delusion. He stared at her, speechless, his last defense crumbling around him. "This isn't about her, is it?" Annelise pressed, her voice softening slightly, not with pity, but with incisive understanding. "This is about your pride. It's about the shame of your father's failures. It was easier to pretend your heart was broken than to admit your fortune was. It was easier to be a tragic lover than a bankrupt duke." She laid her hands flat on the desk, leaning towards him. "Well, the performance is over. I am not a placeholder for a memory. I am your wife, and I am the Duchess of Blackwood. And I have the means and the intelligence to save this family. My fortune is now our fortune. We can clear the debts, invest in the tenants, and rebuild. But I will not do it as your silent, sidelined partner. I will do it as your equal." Alistair sank back into his chair, the fight draining out of him. He looked down at his hands, then up at the resolute, powerful woman standing before him. He had married a pretty, well-bred lady he intended to keep at a polite distance. He saw now that he had profoundly, catastrophically underestimated her. She was not the gentle dove he had imagined, but an eagle. "I am your Duchess," she repeated, her voice resonating with the weight of the title she had finally claimed for herself. "And I will save our name. The only question, Alistair, is whether I will be doing it with you or in spite of you." He had no answer. For the first time since she had met him, the Duke of Blackwood was utterly silenced, stripped of his secrets, his excuses, and his pride. All that was left was the stark, unavoidable truth of the woman in front of him. The aftermath of the confrontation was not a storm, but a profound and unsettling quiet. Alistair retreated, not into his cold aloofness, but into a shell of stunned introspection. The walls he had so carefully constructed around himself had been breached, and he seemed unsure how to exist in the open space Annelise had created. True to her word, Annelise began to act. With the Dowager Duchess running interference and smoothing the way, Annelise met with the family solicitors. She presented them with a clear, concise plan to use her dowry to systematically eliminate the most pressing debts and to fund a series of modernizations on their largest agricultural estate, a project she herself had devised after studying new methods of crop rotation and land management. The old grey-haired men were initially skeptical, but Annelise's command of the figures and her unsentimental, business-like approach quickly won their respect. This was not a flighty duchess playing at estate management. This was a sharp, strategic mind at work. Alistair began to watch her. At first it was from a distance. He would find her in the library late at night, surrounded by maps and ledgers, a deep frown of concentration on her face. He would stand in the doorway, unseen, and simply observe. The woman who had confronted him with such fire was now dedicating herself completely to salvaging his family's legacy. The shame he felt was immense, but it was slowly being eclipsed by a new, unfamiliar feeling. Grudging admiration. A week after their confrontation, he approached her in the library. She looked up, expecting a challenge, but his face was devoid of its usual defenses. "Mr. Abernathy informs me you've designed a new drainage system for the Northfield," he said, his voice quiet. "The plans are ingenious. It's something my father tried and failed to accomplish for years." "Your father used outdated methods," Annelise replied simply, without malice. "The engineering has improved." He nodded, pulling up a chair opposite her. "Show me." And so began their fragile truce. They started working together. Annelise would explain her financial strategies, and Alistair, with his deep, intrinsic knowledge of the land and its tenants, would provide the practical context. Their conversations were still stiff, focused solely on the business of the estate, but the oppressive silence that had defined their marriage was replaced by the rustle of papers, the scratching of pens, and the low murmur of two minds working towards a common goal. There were moments, small and fleeting, where the truce felt like something more. One evening, as they were poring over a complex deed, their hands brushed as they both reached for the same document. A jolt, like static electricity, passed between them. Annelise pulled her hand back quickly, a blush rising to her cheeks. Alistair cleared his throat and looked away, but not before she saw a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Another afternoon, a letter arrived from the steward, detailing the success of the first phase of her plan. The tenants were celebrating the prospect of a profitable harvest for the first time in years. Annelise let out a small, involuntary smile of pure satisfaction. Alistair, watching her, felt the corner of his own mouth lift in response. It was a shared moment of victory, the first they had ever had. The ghost of Lady Seraphina began to fade. Her name was never spoken. Her portrait was quietly removed from Annelise's sitting room one morning and replaced with a beautiful landscape. Annelise never asked who moved it, and Alistair never offered an explanation. It was a silent acknowledgement that the past was losing its power. One night, exhausted after a long day of meetings, Annelise fell asleep at the library desk, her head pillowed on a ledger. She was woken some time later by the gentle weight of a blanket being draped over her shoulders. She opened her eyes a fraction to see Alistair standing over her. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering in the air as if he wanted to brush a stray strand of hair from her face. He didn't. Instead, he simply turned, banked the fire, and left the room as quietly as he had entered. Annelise lay there, her heart beating a little faster. The blanket was warm, smelling faintly of him. It was the kindest, most personal gesture he had ever made. It wasn't a declaration, and it wasn't a romance, but it was a beginning. The ice that had encased their marriage for so long was finally, painstakingly, beginning to thaw. Just as a sense of stability and cautious optimism began to settle over the House of Blackwood, a new threat emerged, this one from the outside. Lord Harrington, a notoriously ruthless financier and a long-standing rival of the Beaumont family, had somehow gotten wind of their previous vulnerability. Believing the Duke to still be in a precarious position, Harrington launched a calculated financial assault, buying up the secondary loans on the estate and threatening to foreclose, a move designed to force a sale of their most valuable lands at a fraction of their worth. The news came like a thunderclap. Alistair was furious, but it was a cold, focused fury, not the panicked despair he might have felt months earlier. He and Annelise were in the library when the solicitor delivered the grim tidings. "He is a vulture," Alistair bit out, pacing before the fire. "He has wanted the Blackwood mines since my father outbid him 20 years ago. He thinks we are weak." "Then we must prove him wrong," Annelise said, her voice a calm anchor in his storm. She was already scanning the documents the solicitor had left, her mind racing. "He is acting on old information. He doesn't know that the primary debts are settled. He believes he has us in a corner. But he can still cause significant damage," Alistair countered, stopping to face her. "A public foreclosure, even on the smaller loans, would create a panic among our other creditors. It could unravel everything we've just spent months rebuilding." In that moment, a fundamental shift occurred. He looked at her not just as an ally, but as his commander in the field. He trusted her judgment implicitly. "What do we do?" "We fight," she said, her eyes alight with fierce determination. "But not in the way he expects. He wants a war of ledgers and lawyers. We will give him a war of reputation and influence." For the next 2 weeks, they worked as a seamless unit. Annelise used her social grace and newfound power as the celebrated Duchess to rally support. She hosted strategic dinners, subtly reminding influential ministers and bankers of the Blackwoods' renewed stability and their long history as pillars of the kingdom. She made it known that Lord Harrington's move was not just business, but a dishonourable attack on an ancient and respected house. Meanwhile, Alistair, freed from the solitary burden of his secrets, used his influence in the House of Lords. He called in old favours and leveraged his political connections, painting Harrington as a predatory opportunist whose tactics threatened the stability of the entire peerage. They became a formidable team, her quiet, social manoeuvring perfectly complementing his public, political power. The climax came during a tense meeting in their solicitor's office, with Lord Harrington and his legal team present. Harrington, a portly man with a sneer permanently etched on his face, laid out his final, predatory offer. Alistair was about to unleash a furious rebuttal when Annelise placed a gentle hand on his arm. She turned to Harrington, her expression one of serene, unshakable confidence. "My lord," she began, her voice resonating with quiet authority. "You seem to be operating under a misapprehension. You believe you are attacking a house in decline. I assure you, the House of Blackwood has never been stronger. My personal fortune has, of course, rectified any minor discrepancies from the past. What you are attempting is not a savvy business move. It is an insult. And I must inform you that the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Governor of the Bank of England, both of whom dined with us last evening, find it an insult as well." The colour drained from Harrington's face. He had been outmanoeuvred. After Harrington's ignominious retreat, Alistair and Annelise walked back to their carriage in the late afternoon sun. The city hummed around them, but they were in their own world. "You were magnificent," Alistair said, his voice filled with an awe he no longer tried to hide. "We were magnificent," she corrected softly. He stopped, turning to her on the busy street. He took her hands in his. "Annelise," he began, his grey eyes, once so cold, now filled with a deep, vulnerable warmth. "When we married, I told you my heart belonged to another. I was a fool. I wasn't clinging to a lost love. I was clinging to my own failure. My father's debts, my inability to fix them. I felt like a fraud. I used the memory of Seraphina as a shield because I was terrified of failing someone else, someone I could grow to care for." His grip on her hands tightened. "But you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you didn't need saving. You saved me. You saved our house. You faced down my demons and taught me to fight again. The woman I respect, the woman I admire, the woman I have come to love, is you." Tears welled in Annelise's eyes, but they were tears of joy, washing away the last traces of the pain from their wedding night. "My heart does not belong to a ghost in the past, Annelise," he whispered, his gaze intense and unwavering. "My heart, my allegiance, my entire being, it belongs to my Duchess." He leaned down and, for the first time, he kissed her. It was not a kiss of duty or passion born of desperation, but one of profound love and gratitude, a promise of a future they would build together, not on a foundation of lies, but on the unshakable bedrock of a hard-won, extraordinary love. And so, the Duke and his Duchess found their beginning not in a grand chapel, but in the ashes of ruin and secrecy. Annelise Beaumont, the bride who was handed a title but denied a heart, proved that the strongest foundations are not built on fairy tales, but on courage, resilience, and the willingness to fight for one's own happiness. She didn't just save a fortune, she saved a man from himself and discovered a love more real and powerful than any childhood romance. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with a spark, but are forged in the fire of adversity. What did you think of Annelise's journey from a heartbroken wife to a powerful Duchess? If you were moved by her story of strength and the discovery of true love, please let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this story with someone who loves a tale of drama and romance, and subscribe to the channel for more stories where karma, courage, and love always win the day. Thank you for listening.